Thanks very much, Matt, and thanks for that thoughtful introduction. Suzanne, did you want to, I see you popped up. I know Frank and I are going to do a conversation.
I was just going to welcome Frank into the conversation. I think you got probably one of the best tee-ups I've heard in a long time from Matt. Brilliant. So thank you so much. And yes, I know that you are going to be making comments to us and that you're being joined in conversation by Frank Cilluffo. And I think many of you know that both of you are experts in your own rights on cyber. And I'm very happy to turn the stage over to the both of you now.
Thanks so much, Suzanne, and thanks for the opportunity to engage here. And I'll wait for Frank to jump on. But that was a fantastic introduction, obviously, by somebody who knows CISA well. So thank you, Matt.
Well, Matt, thank you for that setup. You've all read Kiersten's impressive background with leadership roles in the White House, at the Senate, in industry, educational roles at Harvard and Princeton, teaching stints at Pitt and Stanford. You can tell an underachiever here. So in all sincerity, I couldn't be happier that Kiersten is in a leadership role at CISA, Chief of Staff. When we caught up recently, she reminded me we knew each other for over 20 years. Makes me feel old, but she was this wunderkind kid at the Senate at the time. And bottom line is we've been working cyber together since prior to 9/11. And what I thought I'd do in terms of context is situated around Log4j, but I hope that we can use that as a launch pad to get to a couple of other strategic initiatives that Kiersten, you're driving and CISA is moving on. And I don't want to sound too alarmist, but Log4j really was a 0 day that I think lit the internet on fire. But I think more importantly, it can serve as a backdrop to see how some of these efforts and initiatives at CISA are coming together, notably JCDC, which we discussed. But Kiersten, maybe start with the first question around Log4j, but then contextually, how you think some of the efforts at CISA were able to support the private sector in particular here.
Well, thank you, Frank. And as you mentioned, I mean, we've known each other for over 20 years, but you know, the work that you've led in this space, obviously through this time, it's been great to always collaborate with you and for you to have your leadership. I do think, you know, as we know, this institutional knowledge in this space, while it's a contemporary issue, but the institutional knowledge is proving to be more and more important. So we're not regurgitating what we know doesn't work, but really bringing minds and ideas together to know what the problems are and be able to move them forward. So thanks for your work at the McCrary Institute and what you've done previously. So as you said, I mean, I think what we've talked about with Log4j is that it absolutely is the most far-reaching attack we've seen. And unfortunately, with an esoteric name like Log4j, you sort of lose immediately mainstream engagement in what this is. But what it is, you know, if we look at software products, they're comprised of libraries. There's a vulnerability in this library. And what that means is that it has impact on thousands of devices, which has impact really in hundreds of millions of devices. The thousands of commercial products, and then that translates into hundreds of millions of devices. So the widespread nature of this attack is obviously huge. From the perspective of CISA, and I appreciate Matt's thoughtful recognition, certainly as we've all been in this space, knowing where challenges have been in the past, which has certainly been public-private engagement. When Jen did her Black Hat speech back in August, one of the things that struck me when she was sharing it with me was the term, how she said, it's a hackneyed term. We've been around long enough to know that public-private partnership doesn't have a lot of substance if it's not actionable. So that's why one of the key pieces to what we're doing at CISA is this operational collaboration. And that's really what this Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative was launched to do, to really operate collaboration between industry and government. And Log4j was the first real, front and center example of what that looks like and how we can activate it. And so we identified the event on December 10th. We were able to convene a call based from the JCDC partnerships on that Saturday to talk through what we're seeing and to share information. And then, as Matt talked about with this, the vulnerability list that we had both for government, but then also looking at where Log4j was being exploited. The JCDC really turned out to be this tremendous vehicle. And when we look at the successes of the event, which obviously is something that we're continuing to mitigate, first, CISA became the single authoritative source by design, both from industry as well as government, where we could collaborate and bring together information on what we were seeing. We leveraged the JCDC, as we've talked through, in being able to identify tactics and techniques. So yesterday, the Senate Homeland Security Committee did a hearing on Log4J that just had industry witnesses, but it was certainly, we were appreciative, CISA was appreciative, because the industry representatives were saying how valuable the JCDC was for them in responding to it. And one of the things that they cited was that CISA was able to talk through some of the tactics and the techniques that we were seeing, and then sharing that with our industry partners, who then could go and see what was happening and know what to look for. The other piece to this was helping small and medium-sized businesses, which is something that has been very important to me, and looking at how we help supply chains. But those were some of the ways that the JCDC helped. But then now, importantly, as this issue continues to be remediated, we're driving mitigation measures both for industry and for government. We've heard this now, and I think you'll hear it throughout the day, as Chris Inglis says, in order to beat one of us, you have to beat all of us. This is very much about collaboration. The other term that he and Jen both use is cyber is a team sport. And I think one of the things that we saw with Log4J in the response was that industry was saying in real time they were getting information, but they were also able to work with government to see what they didn't know. And so it was as much about that collaboration and that tool of collaboration as it was about the information that was being exchanged. So obviously something we're continuing to work through, but understanding the value of this collaboration, this certainly Log4J has been an example of success and effectiveness.
Thank you, Kiersten, and excellent points. And I just want to pull that thread a little quicker before we pivot to another issue I know we're both passionate about around workforce. But I think there are two key words here: operational and collaboration. It's translating what you, I, and so many others have discussed for so many years around public-private partnerships, translating those nouns into verbs and actually making it real, actually leading to sort of impact. I'd be curious what you think some of the impediments are to achieving that end state that we're all looking to. And you brought up small businesses, and I know you ran a nonprofit that was critical in terms of providing tools in a previous role to small businesses. What would you like to see there? Because ultimately, when you look at America, the engines that drive us are not only the big defense industrial based companies and the big critical infrastructure owner operators who have the wherewithal, have the resources, and quite honestly, in some cases are ahead of government in terms of what they're doing. But what about the mom and pop shops that keep this country running?
It's a great question, because obviously when we look at our global digital economy, the interdependencies now mean that small and medium-sized businesses are a key component. I think the statistic is 95% of businesses are small businesses. And what's interesting, just to do a little bit of inside baseball, is we've talked through over the years, when we were working on the voluntary framework, the NIST voluntary cybersecurity framework, what we talked about at that point, that was for critical infrastructure, was that it was not about the mom and pop pizza shop on the corner. It was about critical infrastructure. But what was interesting as we moved forward into the commission in 2016 on cybersecurity, one of the commissioners was Ajay Banga, the CEO of MasterCard, who said, we're now at the place where it absolutely is about the mom and pop pizza shop on the corner, because they're using Square or their interconnectedness to their bank make them a key component of supply chains, whether or not it's that linear critical infrastructure supply chain or not. And it was that approach from Ajay Banga that actually led to the discussions we had to launch the Cyber Readiness Institute. But the key piece here is the fact that small businesses actually have more in common with small businesses across infrastructure and across sectors than they do with the big businesses in their own sector. And when we're looking at helping, this is a place where, what was cited yesterday in the hearing was one of the companies talked about the value of JCDC in helping small businesses, because if this information is getting to the partners, and the partners, who are the large companies, have small businesses in their ecosystem, they then have the ability to share the vulnerabilities and what they're seeing, where we all recognize each other as force multipliers. We know that not one entity can be resilient and share all of the information, but we use these partnerships and these relationships to help get out virally to as many businesses, and particularly the small businesses, as possible. And you started with where the impediments are. And I think, again, we've been in this space for so long, and we've heard the phrase over the last 12 months, unique time, inflection point. But I do really believe we are there, because there is a different level of trust with industry and government that exists now, because we are all run the risk of being victims. There was a period of time where we saw a victim as an anomaly, and it was very much of I just hope this isn't, this company or that company. But we all know that the threats are so pervasive, and they're everywhere, and they're every day, that the only way to become stronger and more resilient is by working together. And I think that level of trust now that's been built, and the need for that trust, drives the ability to collaborate and to put us in this place where we are ready for operational collaboration in a way that I don't think we would have been a few years ago, because I asked myself that question, is this something that just didn't happen soon enough? And I do really believe that this is something that the maturity of the threat environment, of industry, of government, and the way that the threats have really happened over the last year, and hitting in an abstract way, the kitchen table with Colonial Pipeline and JBS, creates a unique opportunity to really maximize this collaboration.
I'm really glad you brought up trust. I think trust is the coin of the realm, and takes a long time to build and nanoseconds to lose. So we've got to be on that 24/7, 365. So thank you for that. And I just want to foot stomp the importance of small and medium-sized businesses and where they fit into the broader landscape. Just ransomware has made clear that anyone and everyone can be a target. And I just want to touch one more question, and that's state, local, tribal, and territorial. Because when you look at SLTT, they assume the same risks the feds do. And as we know, we have challenges within the broader interagency to get our arms fully around this. What do you envision CISA can do to better enable, support, operationally and otherwise, SLTT to raise all boats? And that's going to get us segue into a real good discussion around workforce, because whatever challenges we have at the federal level pales by comparison to what state and local are dealing with. But maybe use that as sort of a segue to get to SLTT support and then to our workforce. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And I think you made the appropriate analogy too, which is, small business are to big businesses the way that SLTT is to the federal government, in the sense that they are as critical, and they're really at the grassroots community level, but often don't have the resources. I mean, if we think about it, cybersecurity became a line item in budgets in recent history, right? Relatively speaking. So on SLTT, the good news story here is that Congress passed a grant that CISA is now going to be administering to SLTT entities, specifically in cyber. And it's 4 years, it's over $250 million over 4 years, and it's going to be likely executed in a similar way that the FEMA grants are, so that infrastructure at the state level is something that's familiar. And this is very much, we were just talking and meeting about this yesterday, and how to look at this, because it is very much about how do we help these governments in cybersecurity. And so this extra funding will be targeted at programs, and because it's over 4 years, you can certainly see the impact that 4 years will have and what to focus on. And you raise an interesting point about resources when it comes to small businesses, which is really obviously true for SLTT, which is, they may not have the ability to buy the latest and greatest technology. And that's really where the work around human behavior becomes so important, because when we look at where so many of the vulnerabilities come from, it's often weak authentication, not patching, looking at phishing and phishing training. And so a component to what we're doing at CISA that's targeted at human behavior for individuals, but very much about small businesses, and then looking at state and local governments, is our public awareness campaigns, but that truly focus on how we change human behavior to recognize the role that individuals have in cybersecurity. And so as we look at these grants at the state, local, tribal, and territorial level, we're really going to be looking at measurements for impact and how we can help the jurisdictions across the nation.
Awesome. And I don't want to geek out too much, but this was a big area of emphasis through the Cyber Solarium Commission, and we had a handful of recommendations, and it's great to see Congress acting on those. And we all know policy without resources is rhetoric, so I'm happy to see that some of the funding is following through too. Want to get to work.
I was just going to say, obviously, the great work of the Solarian Commission and so much of what's been driven in Congress by those recommendations and how that has truly moved the needle in just really substantive and significant ways.
Thank you. Let's get to workforce. I mean, it's staggering, the demand and the signal and the need. And rather than the gap narrowing, it seems to be growing. And the reality is we all know this has been an issue we've been struggling with for quite some time. But I'd be curious, and I do want to touch on diversity, and in addition to ensuring that we build up all boats throughout the country, also want to touch maybe on a bit of a pet rock issue of mine, and that's bringing in neurodiverse individuals. But before we sort of jump into that fold, what are we doing to get our arms around this growing challenge, and what unique can CISA do to hopefully narrow that gap rather than see it grow?
Well, as you know, this is also just an issue about which I'm extremely passionate. It's a priority for the director, for Jen, because again, if we don't have the people, cybersecurity is not a technology problem at its core. It's about people, and choose your analogy, but people are the foundation of this. And if we're not bringing in and building out a robust workforce, we are not going to be able to keep up in many ways. But when we talk about that workforce, we tend to move toward math and science, which is absolutely a key set of credentials and capabilities for this space. But when we're looking at building out the workforce, first for the federal government, but then nationally, we're really looking at an interdisciplinary workforce. So cybersecurity is very much about problem solving and building solutions. And if we think about what that means, we've got to bring in expertise in looking at problems differently. So one of the key pieces that we're focused on at CISA when we're looking at recruiting is how do we go to underserved communities to meet students and capabilities where they are. We just can't expect to put a listing on USA Jobs and have the people from all over come with us. So we're building partnerships with nonprofits like Girls Who Code. We're engaging with undergraduate institutions that cultivate service programs, whether it's public service or cybersecurity. We're going to community colleges and vocational schools to look at how do we bring in this interdisciplinary approach. Because if we are truly going to be able to align with the threat and come up with the solutions, we have to ensure that we're looking at problems differently. So a couple of years ago, I was working on the NSTAC's Cyber Moonshot project, which was about securing the internet in 2030. We'll leave that as it is. But one of the things that we talked through was we brought in somebody from USAID to talk about grand challenges, this idea that when you put something out there like securing the internet by 2030, how do you get there? And she used a great example that I've never forgotten from a cybersecurity perspective. She talked about how they were building Ebola suits. They were figuring out how to build the suits for the healthcare workers. And they did this audition nationally, and they were turning people away. And this woman showed up and they said she didn't have the credentials, and she convinced them she did. And this woman ended up being one of the key designers, and she was a wedding dress designer. And she knew breathability, she knew how to move in uncomfortable fabrics, she knew how to, to look at different things when it's on the actual body. And if you think about that type of thinking, we have to look in other spaces to understand the solution. So this interdisciplinary nature for workforce recruitment is critical. We're also looking at how to revise and update retention policies so that they're fair, obviously, across the entity, across the agency, and being able to really provide leadership opportunities and growth. Right now, Jen will say that when we look at the agency, we're very weighted in one area. We've got to be able to bring younger talent in to mentor this talent, to help facilitate the growth of the workforce, again, across disciplines, across capabilities, and across all of the different traits and factors that really embody an individual.
Awesome. And let's jump quickly on diversifying the workforce. I mean, here's the stark reality is we need more American citizens focused on cybersecurity and expanding what we mean by cybersecurity, because the zeros and ones really do matter, but in itself are insufficient. I'd be curious what we're thinking. I mean, let's take women for starters. They make a paltry 20% of the cybersecurity workforce, maybe 25%. To me, that's talent that is just not being tapped. Then you've got socioeconomic, you've got race. how do we expand this workforce to get more US citizens? And I don't mean to be xenophobic here, but we need more US citizens to be able to tackle this. And I think you're right. College is almost too late. And I have a lot of experience with two countries in terms of how they're doing it, K through 12, Estonia and Israel, that punch way above their weight, just like Cipher Brief, by the way, punches way above their weight in terms of what they're able to do. But how can we do things a little differently? How can we motivate? How can we incentivize? How can we build that stable? Because all things said and done, I mean, we've got the greatest talent, but we've got to find ways to bring them in and expand that pool, because you've got some awesome talent that's just not in the game. And we've got to figure out ways to get around that. And I'm going to do one plug here. Sorry, you know, I've never had an unspoken thought, but I serve as a trustee. The state of Alabama stood up the first magnet school focused on cybersecurity and engineering. So they have one for STEM, they have one for the arts, and now they have one specifically, and that's to meet the needs of the Huntsville community, which is just growing exponentially as we speak. So it's not just doing good, it's doing right, doing well, and being smart about this. I hope 50 states come up with a similar initiative, but I'd be very curious, what can we do differently?
Well, you touched on one of the key pieces here, which is how we define diversity. And when we are looking at diversity, diversity of thought means racial, gender, neuro, socioeconomic, background, skill sets, cultural. All of these pieces are what embody diversity. And so when we're looking at recruiting, you and I talked about this, Frank, a little while ago. It's very much about going, again, to where the talent is. And how we do that is through partnerships. And so the magnet school that you represent, I mentioned Girls Who Code, Empower, nonprofit organizations that are in communities to truly work with individuals to say, hey, you actually have the talent and the aptitude in this space. When we look at position descriptions, we have to do a better job of capturing what is truly the position and what is required, because it's not, to your point, always about the ones and the zeros. And I'll jump into the thing that you and I have talked about that I am extremely passionate about, as are you, which is neurodiversity. When we think about innovation and we think about problem solving, having individuals who look at problems differently is really important. And I'm particularly proud of the fact that CISA is going to be the second federal agency to engage with MITRE on a neurodiversity project, where we're going to be employing individuals with autism. And this is just the beginning. And it's not about us saying, you know, we've got individuals with autism working at CISA. It's about saying our workforce is going to represent America. We're going to represent the diversity of gender, socioeconomic, all of these elements and these traits, so that we truly can bring together diversity for innovation and problem solving, and to also inspire younger people to recognize that they have talent that is applicable in this space. And we're looking at leadership training, mentoring within CISA to help cultivate that talent, to partner again with these institutions and organizations to be able to build that out. But I think if we can get to that place where we model what a diverse workforce looks for, and government leads by example, that will be a huge achievement, obviously, not just for government, but truly for how we look at workforce development and growth.
Awesome. That's clearly music to my ears, and thrilled that someone in a leadership position is owning that topic, nurturing that topic, and growing that particular issue. I might just underscore one impediment there, and I think it's one collectively the country, our educational system, and our national security community, where they come together and don't. But we've got to figure out different ways of aptitude tests to be able to steer people. I'm thinking gamifying some of this, where they can have wonderful skills. I mean, if you go back to World War II, women won the war because most of GCHQ on the UK side were women that were deeply involved in cryptology, cryptography, and quite honestly, if you can steal other people's secrets and keep yours secret, game over. That's why I think Kelly's points earlier about quantum cryptography are potential game changers. But it's also how we bring people into the fold. So I'm not asking you to answer that, but I hope MITRE is is looking at some unique ways to, and they do phenomenal work to get our arms around this.
And I'll say one piece on this, and it's something Frank, you and I talked about. One of the ways that I'm looking at a lot of the issues, both the challenges and the goals that we're seeking to achieve at CISA, is by piloting different ideas and recognizing, you know, whether it's a hiring process and ushering a candidate through to see where obstacles show up in our process to be able to address them. Or in this case, if we're looking at how do we build this out and how do we help to measure aptitudes, working with communities and organizations and developing, you know, procedures and ways of approaching this that we can then scale, but really starting at the community level and with engagements, again, with the organizations, the universities, and getting singular experiences and case studies from which we can learn, and then being able to amplify and scale them. But obviously, measuring aptitudes and helping individuals understand that there is not a linear way to determine if you are capable in cybersecurity, but that if you have aptitudes and strengths, which everybody does, it's being able to align those aptitudes with the positions that are out there. And so we also within the agency are looking at how we're describing the work that we do. You know, when I ran President Obama's commission in 2016, my position description was an IT specialist because that was the only position description for cyber related at the time in the organizations and the agencies that I was working in. But that's it, just as an example of how we have to grow and evolve, how we look at this and how we define what is required and what we're seeking.
Great point. I'm glad you brought that up. And key performance indicators and everything else are so key to all of this. But I want to give you an opportunity to touch briefly on sort of the cyber talent management system and what DHS CISA is doing to try to backfill and hopefully leap forward its own workforce.
So the cyber talent management system was just launched on November 15th, and it's something that people have worked on for a long time with DHS. And the idea here is that it's a way and a model of recruiting individuals with deep cyber talent into government with a different type of selection process and in a different structure, so that the pay and the salary and other elements that would interest individuals and attract them are all higher. It's a different setup. It doesn't have some of the same benefits of the healthcare, et cetera, but the idea is that the pay and the income and the value is increased in a way to truly attract bright minds. Because as you know, I mean, as we look at recruiting people, particularly in this space in technology, the private sector is a very comfortable, lucrative, you know, exciting, provocative place to do this work. So how can we engage individuals in government? Which I will just use that as an opportunity to talk through the fact that, you know, when we look at this, when we're trying to recruit individuals in cyber, it's not for the idea of the antiquated version of, you know, you're going to be in government for your entire career. Some people do, and that's tremendous. But when we're looking in the cyberspace, the value really comes from that rotation and that toggle between government and industry. And we're also looking at partnerships with companies that are facilitating that, where they bring individuals on, they hire them, they then rotate into government, into senior positions and positions within CISA, and then go back into industry. And there is a huge value there as well. So we're looking at different models to really foster that agility between industry and government, not just in the operational collaboration piece, but really agency-wide.
Awesome. I mean, hostage taking is always a good thing. I mean, the reality is you want to be in someone else's shoes and appreciate their challenges. And it gets to the one team, one fight bumper sticker, which is a good bumper sticker that Chris, Jen, I know you and others all conclude. And I might note that I feel that the triad of FBI, CISA, and NSA. So CISA plays a key role here, but your interagency partners also play critical roles. And I feel like that is coming together. I feel like we've sometimes overcomplicated that issue. If you can figure Rob Joyce's cybersecurity directorate at NSA with CISA and the FBI, I think you're about 90% of the way there, maybe 80% Pareto principle. But all good things. Rather than lead the witness, I want to sort of offer you an opportunity, just because we're coming down to a couple minutes left. What are some of the other priorities you have to take CISA to the next level? And I dare I say, progress is noticeable. So curious what some of your thoughts are, rather than me try to steer you in any direction.
Well, I appreciate that. And obviously, I mean, you mentioned at the outset that having worked on these issues for a long time, the collaboration certainly across industry and government, and seeing how we can make this progress and the results of which really truly coming together, and that trust that's being built has been critical. I look at the mission of CISA in 3 buckets. It's what we're doing internally to build out the agency, and that really is about workforce development and hiring, and how we can recruit and retain the best talent, and really make it a strong business case for industry also to work with us and how we share talent. That's one piece. The second piece is the work that we're doing with the federal interagency, and you just talked about it, but truly getting to the geek in me and all of this, one of the greatest achievements other than the JCDC since I've been here, and I'm only at 4 months, has been the binding operational directive on the interagency with a list of known vulnerabilities being shared across the 101 agencies. That to me felt like such a step forward to say, okay, we as the agency responsible for defending the government's networks, we're going to share with you what we're seeing, and we're going to tell you what it is, and we'll work with you on the remediation. And our partnership with the Office of the National Cyber Director, not just on that, but across the board, I think is also this magic ingredient for success. We're so fortunate to have Chris Inglis in that role and the team that he's building out, and how that cooperation and collaboration is really being executed to help secure the government and the networks that are there. And then the third piece is the industry, is the building out the JCDC, other opportunities for collaboration, as I talked about with education, with diversity initiatives. We're looking at the ability to build out a public awareness campaign that truly is something that will change human behavior. And we have these vehicles in the Director's Cybersecurity Advisory Committee, which is looking at priorities around workforce, strategic communications, public awareness, as well as the CSRB that we're doing with the Department of Homeland Security, which is the after action and the review of incidents to truly be able to learn from what's going on. So I think as we look at this complexion, it's prioritizing these 3 buckets and looking at those pieces that are going to move the needle. Importantly, not just to manage the threat of today, but really as much as possible being able to manage and anticipate the threat of tomorrow.
Kiersten, awesome. I want to thank you for your leadership, your commitment to public service. I may be a heretic for 1 second because I want to pull a thread on what Jim Allen said when we talk about you can't look at cyber in isolation of geopolitical context. And here's the reality. I'm going to don't call me a heretic. It's not about winning the cyber war. It's about winning the war and how cyber can make that happen, and how it can enable the blue, the defender. And I think CISA is very much in the front lines. We all are. And I just want to do a very brief hat tip to Suzanne, Rick, and the amazing team at Cipher Brief. I said it before, you guys do punch above your weight, but you put together another amazing session, and thrilled to be part of that. Kiersten, rock and roll, whatever we can do to help, we're here. So over to you, Suzanne.
Frank, thank you so much. And Kiersten, I want to thank you as well. I just wonder if we could squeeze in one more question. General Petraeus had a great one, which is really practical, I think, for everybody. He just wants to know, first he says, thank you, Kiersten, for your great work. But he wants to know how a company becomes a part of that joint cyber collaborative.
Well, thank you, General, for your leadership on these issues and for how you've weighed in this space. So I think we have our contact information. Our cybersecurity division is looking at how we build out the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. This has been a very deliberate growth, and I think if the general's looking to connect, I think my email is made available, but we're really connecting companies who have interest to the cybersecurity division. We have other vehicles for that collaboration as well. And so as we look to bring this in, this is not an exclusive party. It's very much about how do we engage industry as thoughtfully as possible. So I would encourage any company just to reach out to me, and then we can connect through the cybersecurity division again, because we have vehicles for that engagement. Like the ecosystem, we are only as good as those who are a part of it. And so being able to engage the companies, because there are so many that are doing great work, the better we will be. And then I will take this opportunity to always thank Frank for the collaboration. It's great to have the conversation, but to Suzanne and Rick, what you are all doing with the Cipher Brief and how you're really raising the dialogue to get at those issues that are really thinking forward. It's always great to be able to participate and contribute to your work. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Thank you both as well. We really appreciate all of the conversations today, and you touched on some really big issues. You know, the workforce issue is one of them that Rick's going to be talking a little bit later today with Teresa Shea. It does not have to be this hard. And I'm really looking forward to that conversation this afternoon. So thank you both for being here and for being part of the SIG with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
War Eagle.
Great job.